Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. So it's been a pretty awesome journey so far, delving into the 40k universe, and I appreciate your guys' support and answering my questions, and yeah, just general interest in going into the 40k universe here with me. I've ordered the first book in the Horus Heresy storyline, so I'm just diving right into it here. We're just gonna get right into it. So as I'm going through and reading that, I'm probably gonna give some progress reports and maybe do some videos going over reviewing and reacting to a series of chapters that I've gone through and read, and kind of give my progress as I'm going through and what I think, and maybe give some predictions as to where I think the story is gonna go, and then give a review at the end. And I may jump around between books to books. I know the Horus Heresy is an extremely, detailed and long story and timeline. So there may be some, other books and stuff that jump to in between, but I'm gonna start doing that. We've also got, a poll going on for those who may be interested in doing a Dark Tide, community game night. So I'm gonna plan to set that up here. We got Thanksgiving coming up here in the States this coming week. So maybe the first or second week of December is probably when I'll look to do that, but I'll put an announcement in the community tab, and also in my Discord. If you guys, for those who would be interested in doing that, I have a Discord set up. The link is down below in the description, so you can just feel free to join my Discord, and I'll have some announcements and stuff going on in there. So we got some interesting stuff going on here with the 40k stuff, and I really appreciate it, and really appreciate all the love on the channel. And so the one thing that I have actually always been interested in with the 40k universe is the tabletop game itself. I don't really know a lot about it. I know very little bit about it. I've watched a few streams of people playing it, but it is something that I've always been interested in getting into, but just never have had the time or really the money to kind of do it. So so far from previous videos, the factions that I think I would be interested in playing, the Space Wolves would be one. I think the Space Wolves would be my #1 faction that I would probably be interested in playing, with the Grey Knights probably being tied with them. Those two, it would probably be between those two factions for the ones that I would want to start with. The Raven faction, I can't remember the full name of the Raven Primarch, and which I guess is kind of more of like a sniper ranged faction of the Space Marines. They sound pretty dope, and I think I would have fun playing them. The Nurgle Space Chaos Marine faction I think would be fun. Those two would be tied for second, and then probably the Tzeentch Chaos Marines would be my third place faction. From everything I know so far and things talked about, those would be the factions so far that I would be interested in playing as far overall. The Necrons would also probably have some interest, and the Tyranids would also have some interest, but those would be, something later on. Maybe even some Orcs, but I think the factions that I just mentioned there would be the ones that I would look at starting with. So we're going to jump into a video here, another one by Bricky. What is the best Warhammer 40k faction and army to start with? And so that's a big question that I would have. So I guess he's going to go over that and give his opinions on, what factions he would like to start with, and talk about how they play on the tabletop. So that's stuff that I'm also very interested to learn about. So let's jump right on in it here.
I must say the support on my prior Warhammer video has been, to put it lightly, absolutely outstanding. I've not had a video perform that well in maybe 3 to 4 years, and it's also a breath of fresh air to be able to make a video on something on a whim, on Warhammer, while very popular game, not a game that I ever really made videos on, and to have it perform as well as it does. YouTube and the YouTube world doesn't like change very much, so it is incredibly
It's pretty true.
But with that, it also came with a question that was always being asked to me ever since making that video. Hey Bricky, what army should I play? So for this, my next major Warhammer video, I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to go over all the different kinds of armies, just like we went with the main video, except instead of lore, we're going to be going through the different various ways of collecting the army, as in not only price-wise, but how many models you're going to need, and how new or old the model scopes are, and we're going to be going over the play styles of each army respectively. Are they melee? Are they shooting? Are Are they a little bit of both? Elite armies with only 20 models on the battlefield, or horde armies with 120 models on the battlefield? We're going to be discussing all of those, what each army is about, and
so I think, and I'm basing this off of the Total War Warhammer games. I believe the way you can field your army is it's based on like a point system, and depending on the unit, each unit has various points allocated to them. You know, the better a unit's supposed to be able to perform, the more expensive they are to field. So, you know, if you have a lot of, you know, super elite units, like you're saying, you can't have as big of an army, but they should be able to deal with, you know, things better, etc., etc. I think that's how it goes. I'm not positive. I'm assuming that's what he's going to go over here. And again, I'm just basing that off of the Total War Warhammer, you know, video game. So, but that's about it, I think, as far as I know, for the tabletop stuff.
120 models on the battlefield. We're going to be discussing all of those, what each army is about, and give you at least a decent run through of every single faction to allow you to make the conscious and intelligent choice on which army you want to play if you want to get into the tabletop of Warhammer 40,000. But first, before we start, I need to show you something. So I own an absolute like boatload of wall art all across my house. I received from cons. And so when I was contacted by Displate to sponsor this video, it was like an immediate yes. Anyway, I wanted to show you the ones I got because Displate is the sponsor for this video. The first one is a wonderful one from the
No Country for Old Men. Great movie.
Old Men. This is probably my favorite movie of all time because I am a messed up human being and I like the dark, depressing shit. However, this one, I love it. It's very simplistic and it shows off the simplistic poster art that I tend to enjoy a lot. Now, past that, I actually got one for my mother because she is a huge Stephen King fan. So I got this fantastic Pennywise one to go along with it. And the third one I got...
That's an interesting gift to give to your mother.
Vadi Vidya.
That's funny. Vadi Vidya. Dark Souls. Very much so. I'm a huge Souls fan. I love Dark Souls. I actually, I'm still playing through Lords of the Fallen. I plan on getting videos for that up on my YouTube channel. So you're interested in Let's Plays, I have got Liza P up. I plan on getting Lords of the Fallen up. I still have Remnant 2 to play through. I still have Cyberpunk that I plan on playing through, and I plan on getting, you know, my playthroughs up on YouTube. So if any of that interests you guys, you know, look for those coming up here on the channel. But yeah, huge Souls fan, waiting for that Elden Ring DLC, you know, announcement when we're actually going to see what it's about. But yeah. Vadi Video, great channel, great lore, you know, dump channel for Soul stuff. Apparently he's got a big Armored Core 6 video coming out soon. It's like a 3-hour long thing that he's been working on. Insane. But I hope someday to be able to get to the point where I can do, you know, lore videos on certain things like Souls and 40K and et cetera, because I love stuff like that.
In general, and he has, I can't show you it right now because I got the extra large version because I wanted the big one of his. It is a absolute like gorgeous piece. It is just
that's awesome.
Nice looking in real life.
He's got a lot of great artwork that he's put together and commissioned.
3 separate displays to go along with the sponsorship. I immediately receive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra ones and then change. And I kind of start realizing why they wanted a Warhammer video so much. Orcs. Gotta have orcs. Sisters of Battle. We'll be talking plenty about them today. Angels of Death in all their glory. More Angels of Death in all their glory.
That's
and
dope.
Drukhari, I don't know what this is.
That's pretty dope too. That looks like Malekith from Warhammer Total War. It looks like Malekith with the crown like that. Maybe I'm wrong. It could be someone else.
Archon, I don't play Drukhari, but obviously Dark Eldar. I know the spikes. I get the spikes. I love the fact that you can just slap it onto your wall with a magnet with no fuss, and especially for someone who was renting a place, and I know a lot of you have had those experiences with landlords where you try to hang.
I think it's also, I'm just sitting here thinking after, you know, seeing what I believe that is Malekith. The Warhammer Fantasy is something I also want to get into. I also want to get into, you know, the books with Warhammer Fantasy and reading some of that stuff and getting into that as well.
Hang up wall art, you put a nail into.
I'm just a sucker for any kind of fantasy stuff. I love good stories and good, rich, diverse universes that have good stories and characters and stuff in them, and like Warhammer Fantasy, Star Wars, 40K, Mass Effect is another great, series that I think I would love to see more stuff done in, and they have a new game coming out with that, Dungeons and Dragons stuff. I'm just a sucker for all that shit. So
to the wall, and they're like, oh, ooh, is that a 2mm hole I see right there? That's $300 out of your security deposit, kid. So thank you very much, Display, for sponsoring this video. I would highly recommend checking them out. They make absolutely fantastic stuff. So check them out, they're in the description, and let us continue with the video, starting off with a couple terminology we should learn before we actually get super deep into it. First things first, there's a thing called Forge World. Forge World is actually a lore thing with the Adeptus Mechanicus. However, what it is actually a partner to Games Workshop. Forge World makes these kind of custom minis that aren't in the codexes specifically. However, you can use them and feel.
So I assume this is where like you could get like the official minis from them instead of like necessarily hiring someone to make and paint them for you. You could probably just order them straight from Games Workshop or whatever through this Forge World website. Okay.
Them in your games. They're just generally expensive, kind of a little bit weirder. They're a little bit more bizarre and sometimes like fan-made creations and such. But Forge World is like a side company of Games Workshop that makes 40K. I might mention them a few times. I wanted to go ahead and tell you about that. They're not used a ton, but they are something that you can use. Next, I want to tell you about hitting numbers. So if I ever say something like, oh, this army hits on 3s or 4s or 5s, what I'm saying is if they hit on 3s, that means if you roll a d6 and you throw it out there, if you get a 3, 4, 5, or 6, anything 3 or higher, then you hit your shot. You've landed onto your target. If I say they hit on 4s, it's 4 and up,
4 and up, 5 and up,
etc. And finally, we have things called stratagems. I'm going to mention those a few times. Stratagems are like special abilities you can use after having a pool of command points that you get for building your army.
Okay.
And you can kind of dole those out, these special abilities, stratagems, as you wish. You ever played Command and Conquer, Red Alert 3, or perhaps...
Huge Command and Conquer fan growing up. I love the Command & Conquer series. I would love to see a remaster of all of the Command & Conquer games. We got the original one in Red Alert, but Tiberian Sun, Command & Conquer 3, Red Alert 2, and, Yuri's Revenge, Command & Conquer Generals. I would love to see those, like, remastered, so that they can be played on modern, stuff.
Kane's Wrath, my personal favorite was always Kane's Wrath. Those little abilities on the side of the map, it's like those. Let's start off with the number one best army you should collect for a new player, Space Marines. Before we get into tactics, before we get into how they play, I want to remind you all of the most important rule, the golden rule of collecting Warhammer. You will always have a better time with the army whose lore you like and design you prefer.
Play what looks cool, what you think is right.
You think are the coolest. If you like undead Egyptian space robots that have enslaved gods as weapons, buy the damn Necrons. I don't care if Necrons are S tier or F tier, buy the damn Necrons, okay? If you love Viking aesthetic and you love Space Marines, get the damn Space Wolves.
I've said it a bunch in my previous videos. I'm a sucker for Norse, Greek, and Egyptian mythology, so anything that's, themed within those or has themes with that stuff, I'm down with.
Okay, if you love Viking aesthetic and you love Space Marines, get the damn Space Wolves. I don't care if they're S tier or F tier, get the army that you love the lore and the design of first. Nothing sucks more than playing a meta army that some people might not even want to play you against because you're going super power gamer and having to paint and create an army that you don't like. Play the army you think is the coolest. Golden rule. Okay, Space Marines. So the poster boys of Warhammer are our first faction today, and I know when I said that the best army to collect, all the new players are like, oh god, not the Space Marines, the generic ones, and all the veteran players are gonna say, oh god, not more Space Marine players I gotta deal with, and the tournament players are already ready to hire a hitman to kill me. But I'm sorry, I know, I agree, Space Marines are, whew, right now, but they really are the best army. If you are a new player, Space Marines are your best bet. They are the best army to collect if you are a new player, and let
I wonder if that's just because they're mechanically the simplest ones to like really understand and get into. They're just pretty straightforward, their play style. They're not like necessarily super complicated, and they're like, I guess probably one of the more versatile factions. They may not be the best at specific things, but they're all around good at everything. You know, I generally find like factions like that are usually good starting points in most games. So I would assume that, you know, the Space Marines are probably that way.
Your best bet. They are the best army to collect if you are a new player, and let me tell you why. Number one, Space Marines got all the lore. They got a monopoly on lore. They easily have the most fleshed out backgrounds of any of the characters. Or
I mean, that's generally when you think of Warhammer 40K, it's Space Marines, and I mean there's a reason why.
They easily have the most fleshed out backgrounds of any of the characters or factions in Warhammer. Space Marines have the most books. Space Marines are a huge part of the Horus Heresy. Just Space Marines will always have the most, and they have the most depth to them. Number two, Space Marines are very easy to paint, especially for new players. When you get Space Marines, you have a ton of variety of chapters, and they all have a ton variety of colors, and they're also pretty easy. Space Marines are also very large, or at least larger than normal, so their canvas size is much bigger. Smooth armor, much easier to paint, especially their vehicles, and the paint schemes are easy. Ultramarines, blue, white scar, white, Imperial Fist, yellow, salamanders, green. It's extremely easy to paint Space Marines, and for a new player, I would highly recommend them for that specific part, because the painting and building is a massive part of this hobby. Number three, Marines are always getting new models. They are always getting equal attention from Games Workshop. Even if they have just been updated, they will get updated again and again and again.
That makes sense.
And the Harlequins and Dark Eldar players are crying in a corner, but we don't care about them because I got a new Primaris Lieutenant and he's got a skull shield. I don't know. They're always getting new models, and while it might be a little excessive at times, they will always be updated, and your rules will always be changing, and therefore it keeps it very fresh if you're interested in playing them.
Makes
Number four,
sense.
you have a vast amount of data sheets and units at your disposal. See, in a codex, you have
so technically, you know, if you're playing them, it would be it's difficult, I guess, to get bored, you know, as long as you're able to, you know, collect the models. Like you said, they're easy to paint. There's a lot of different chapters for them, and there's a huge unit variety. So it sounds like, you know, for the Space Marines in general, which is, I'm assuming he's talking about all the factions and whatnot as a whole, you know, you just have a lot of versatility in play. You know, whatever kind of style you want, there's a faction for it in Space Marines. And as you said, all the rules are changing and updated very often, so it just sounds like it's pretty difficult to get bored playing the Space Marines.
apart after all the lore of it, after some of the keywords and art pieces and stuff. You have the data sheet section where it goes over all of your units and what they do and their stats and everything, their special rules and so on. And when you get to that spot, however many units an army has depends on, well, you know, how many pages of data sheets is it. Take the Adeptus Custodes. They have a very small amount of units, and their standard codex of data sheets is only 11 pages long. Sisters of Battle, however, a little more medium force. They have 19 pages of data sheets. The Imperial Guard, they have a much, much larger amount of data sheets because they're such a large army. They have 39 pages of data sheets. Space Marines, 56.
That's a lot.
56 pages of data sheets for different kinds of units. It's a little bloated at times because of the amount of characters and stuff, but still, they are all over the place. Their variety is endless, and it is being even more updated and added as time goes on. Which brings me to number 5, and the most important of them all. Space Marines use every phase of the game. See,
interesting. Okay, so like, yeah, I didn't even know the games had like various phases. Okay, interesting. So, command phase, movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, charge phase, fight phase. Okay, and I assume it like revolves around. Interesting. Okay.
in Warhammer, there are phases in each turn. We're just getting into 9th edition, so we're getting something called the command phase soon, which is fine. But then we have the movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, the charge, fight, and then morale phase. Now, the last 3 are kind of all packed into one, if I'm being perfectly honest. But the main thing is that a lot of armies might utilize some of these phases a lot more often than expected. Grey Knights are very big in the psychic phase because they're all psychic,
Gotcha.
so they really have a lot there. While Tau don't have any psychers, and they won't even use that phase, but they've got really damn good shooting. However, they don't have any melee, so they're not going to be using the charge phase. Whereas, say, Slanesh Demons will use the charge and psychic phase plenty, but they won't be doing any shooting of like any kind, pretty much. The Marines, they will use every single phase, and you can't get good at the game and get good at the phases unless
you don't know how to play them.
All of them, and that's where Space Marines really shine.
Knowing how to play the phases and how to defend against the phases is obviously how you're going to get better at it, so that makes sense.
The phases, unless you're able to use all of them, and that's where.
Yeah, I'm curious if anyone knows, is there any kind of, I know there's a ton of Warhammer 40k games. Is there any 40k game that is like really like very similar to how the tabletop is played, with similar rules how the tabletop is played? I know there's a lot of various 4X games, you know, and there's the Battlefleet Gothic, you know, games. There's a lot of different, you know, kind of Civilization 4X kind of games. I have a couple of them, but I haven't really gotten super deep into them. But I'm just curious if anyone knows if there is a specific 40k game that is very similar to the tabletop. Because it would surprise me that there isn't, with, you know, video games and how big they are nowadays, and with a franchise like this, it would surprise me that Games Workshop hasn't tried to digitalize, I guess, or video game-ize, whatever you want to call it, the 40k game or even the fantasy game, and make like a tabletop version of that can be played on video games, you know, because I think they would make a ton of money if they were to do that.
Space Marines really shine. You can play them however you want in any kind of role. See, if you are running, let's say, an Iron Hands or Imperial Fist army, these are both shooting-based armies. But you can still have good melee, where if you wanted to play a more melee-based army.
Right, that's kind of like what I was talking about. It seems like the Space Marines are just like a versatile faction. They're good at everything, and maybe some sub-factions or whatever might specialize a little more in certain. Some factions might specialize in siege warfare more. Some might specialize in hit-and-run tactics more. Some might specialize in melee more. But in general, they're just a versatile faction, and they're not necessarily great at any one particular thing, but they're not bad at anything really either.
But you can still have good melee, where if you wanted to play a more melee-based army like Space Wolves or Blood Angels, you'd still have good shooting units. You could still do plenty in the shooting phase. That's the most important part. Space Marines will use every single phase, and they are very, very good at it. So that is the main 5 reasons why you should be playing, or at least
hitting my microphone. Sorry if that's bothering you guys.
I don't need more Space Marines in tournaments, but it is the best decision. They're good to paint, they're good to collect, they're always getting updated, they got tons of units, they use every phase, and you can tailor them however you'd like. Plus, and this is kind of down the line, but eventually after playing them enough, you might understand which army you'd want to collect second. If you start collecting a little bit of Space Marines, you start realizing, oh wow, I really think I'd prefer having more models on the table, or I wish I had tougher models. Then you can go for Tyranids or then Adeptus Custodians. It helps you figure out your second army a lot better. If you're a new player, you want to get interested in it, just do this. Go online, get yourself either, or check eBay, because there's tons of offhand Marine stuff on.
Yeah, I would bet, honestly, like eBay, and maybe even locally. I don't know what you guys have in other areas, but like locally, we have something called Craigslist down here in the States. So, I mean, I would bet things like that would probably be great. Amazon, probably too. There's probably like third-party sellers you can get on Amazon that'll make stuff.
Online, get yourself either, or check eBay, because there's tons of offhand Marine stuff on eBay. Get yourself a pack of intercessors or maybe a tactical squad. I'd say intercessors because they're more modern, they're newer and more meta, and they're bigger for better paint canvases. Put them together with some glue, get some paint on them, try them out, and try getting into the game that way. I think it'd be a pretty smart and a pretty solid idea to get someone new into the hobby, and Space Marines just really are one of the better choices right now. Okay, whew. Now that I'm done sucking as much Marine dick as your brain, let's move on to the rest of the armies. And my personal favorite army at the current moment, the Imperial Guard, or the Militare, is fucking the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard are my main army. They are what is known as a gunline horde army. Whereas Orcs and Tyranids have a horde army that has shooting, but it's more melee based, the Guard is going to be running 60 to 100 infantrymen, support walkers.
So he's just large army PPUs. Okay, I can see that. I would think the Imperial Guard honestly would be pretty fun because they're probably like a more, they're the 40K version of what like a modern, you know, the United States Army or modern army would be, essentially. I think is how they would probably play. So I could see them being pretty fun.
Artillery batteries, aircraft, drop troops, tanks, bigger tanks. The Guard is all about just blistering firepower. Now, however, the downside to this is that the Guard, while well-trained, are only 4-up well-trained. They hit on 4s, and they also do not have very good survivability. Guard stuff tends to be rather fragile. They very rarely have any special saves to keep them from taking any damage. Most of their stratagems aren't based around survivability.
It's a big-ass tank there.
More firepower. Guard don't shoot amazing with their 4-up accuracy, but they make up for that with just sheer amounts of numbers of shots. I don't care if my tank hits on 4s when I've got fucking 3 of them. If the Marines are like the pristine Swiss Army knife where they can do anything and they have a little tool for every situation, Guard are like a Swiss Army knife that's about 10 times as big and attached to a big wooden stick that you just beat the shit out of people with. Your units are squishy, they don't hit great, but you've got so many.
Yeah, you just overwhelm them, so it doesn't matter.
Drowning them in gunfire. As for collecting the Guard, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Their models are a bit older than I'd like. I personally think that they could use a decent amount of updates. They do get updated plenty rules-wise, but since they've got so many different kinds of units and so many Forge World options, a lot of them are a bit old and are showing their age. As for collecting them in the money side, they're pretty expensive. You're going for a Horde army, so you're going to have tons of models.
So you're going to need a lot of models.
That being said, I still do love.
That is kind of something I hadn't really thought about until you mentioned that. Yeah, some armies are just going to be more expensive because in order to field a full army, you're just going to have more models. So that's also something to think about, you know, getting into the game is, you know, numbers of units and how much you're going to, you know, willing to spend to start, you know, for your first starter army.
Love them. I love their lore and their design. I love the large swaths of infantry, and I personally think they are pretty fun, if maybe not the greatest army as a main army. The Adeptus Mechanicus are the war cult of Mars. They are very weird, and I've been over how weird they are plenty before, but they are probably one of the wackiest armies in the game, maybe along with Gene Stealer cults. The Adeptus Mechanicus have a lot of really weird back and forth styles when it comes to their gameplay. They're mainly a shooting army. I'd say they're about 75% shooting, 25% melee. However, they do have a couple dedicated melee units that can hurt pretty bad, but they're much lower on the tier list.
Those are some dope looking models.
Gunfire they can bring.
They look like whatchamacallit, I can't think of the term or whatever. It's a unit in the fantasy in Warhammer Total or whatever. There's like fanatics or whatever. They look very fanatical.
Pretty bad, but they're much lower on the tier list compared to the amount of gunfire they can bring. They hit pretty well. They generally hit on 3s, sometimes 4s, depending on if they're using mechs or their own current bionics. But they do definitely have some of the wackier stuff. The entire army has a 6-up invulnerability save, so occasionally you get some pretty clutch moments when you start taking damage and you roll a couple dice and you get a couple 6s and you can shrug off like full-on missiles and stuff. So that is pretty cool. Like one of their base weapons is a really regular kind of crap crappy carbine, but if you roll a 6 for it, it does double damage, which can actually
Oh.
be ludicrously
Crit on
powerful at
6s, huh?
times. Then you've got the weird robots, the Castellan robots, that they're these giant like World War I mech dudes that have a refractor field, so if they block off shots with their, well, you know, reflector and vulnerable save, it'll launch back damage towards the enemy, which can be quite crazy.
That's kind of
They're
dope.
very strange. They definitely are quite strange. Much more shooting over melee, and definitely fun. It has some.
They sound kind of more of a like a technological faction. I mean, obviously he's saying they're much more of a range faction, but they sound kind of like more of a, I don't know what's the word. I mean, yeah, technological faction, but like, I'm having a brain fart. I don't know. It's not mechanized. That's not the word I'm looking for, but essentially kind of that. They seem kind of more, I don't know, more technology focused mechs, and you know, shooting and shields and stuff like that. Sounds interesting.
Great looking characters. Belisarius Call might be one of the
That
best
looks
models
dope.
in the entire game. Super cool looking too. A bitch to paint though. Oh my god. And that does lead me
I would
to
bet.
the collect.
I would bet a lot of those are a pain in the ass to paint. I'm not very good at like painting stuff like this, and I'm not very patient when it comes to tedious little tasks. So I think I would have to probably pay someone to paint a lot of the stuff for me. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who could do it. So, but yeah, I don't know. I might give it a try at some point in time, but, yeah, it's, I'm not very good at little tedious tasks like that. I get very impatient with like little tedious things like that and get annoyed with it and frustrated. So
Of the AdMech part itself. They're actually getting a lot more newer updates lately. They're actually one of the newest armies as well. They came out only a couple years ago. All their stuff is in plastic and it looks really damn good. I personally think that they have some of the best aesthetics in the entire game. The only problem is that painting them is going to be a real bitch. I would recommend trying to do some of the simpler stuff, like maybe the Dune Crawler, before you get into things like Call or a Tech Priest Dominus, because wow, is painting that going to be really damn hard. Cost-wise, they are getting a bunch of new units, which is great, but generally when you get
I mean, look at that. I'm like literal mechanized cavalry. That's dope, man. Those are cool looking little models, man. That's sick.
new units, they are very expensive, and whenever new stuff comes out, it tends to be a bit expensive. The army isn't a horde, but it's
Dude, those look dope. With the wings and whatnot, those look sick, man.
also not an elite army, so they're probably in the mid-ground when it comes to price range. However, I would recommend them to people who like some kind of wacky antics and some weird abilities and weaponry, because AdMech has been getting
Oh
better and
man, I keep
better as
yawning. I
it
need to
goes
get
on,
some coffee.
and they're pretty dang cool to collect. So mid-tier price, maybe a little bit more expensive, but their scopes look great and they're very new, and I would highly recommend them. Next up, you've got the Adeptus Sororitas, or also known as the Sisters of Battle. My second
Adeptus
favorite army,
Sororitas.
though I will be honest, they are really coming up to overtaking the Imperial Guard. I love my Guard, I love my Cadians, I love my Tempestus Scions, but the Sisters of Battle, they're really cool. Not only from a lore perspective, they're just insanely religious, zealotous nuns. That already is just really dang cool. As for the tabletop, they're one of the closest range armies in the entire game that isn't a full-on melee army. They're a slow-moving, like advancing gunline army with some actually horrifying melee units.
So, do they kind of play like a what is it? Kind of like a colonial Revolutionary War kind of army, where you gotta have like you said, you just have gun lines sticking close together, and they just keep advancing, no matter what, and just, you know, fire as they can go, and you just have firing lines set up that way. That would be interesting if that's the case.
And just some like ridiculous close range firepower. The Sisters are probably one of the top 3 hardest armies to play, I'd say. They've got some really weird antics as well, kind of like AdMech, maybe not quite as wacky. This army can be played in almost any way.
That's a dope looking model.
Full gunline army or a full melee army or 50-50.
Okay.
Everything is viable. They do require a lot of finesse and manipulation because these are all low toughness Sisters that do have good armor, but when you've got a low toughness like they do and they're not necessarily the most powerful when it comes to the actual punching, they can actually be shot off pretty quickly. So you need to be really smart on how you maneuver them because you've got a super short range, kind of squishy army at times. That can be a little bit challenging to get through. That being said, people are sleeping on the power of Sisters. Let me be the first one to say it. You are all sleeping on how strong this army is. This army, if played well by a smart...
Y'all are sleeping, he says. Wake up.
Say it. You are all sleeping on how strong this army is. This army, if played well by a smart person, will crush you. As for the actual collecting of the models, Sisters are the most recent army, at least as the time of making this video, who have had a complete army overhaul. For a while, there were no plastic Sister models whatsoever, but the entire army, besides I think one unit, got a full overhaul of models. Everything is brand spanking new, and they probably have the best looking models in the entire game, in my opinion.
They do look dope.
They look incredible. That crazy gothic, kind of Catholic nun look. I mean, come on. Their
cathedral
is a pipe organ missile launcher. It's a pipe organ
yeah, that thing looks
Sisters
insane.
Are one of the coolest looking armies in the entire game. They are a bit expensive, though. That's the one downside, is that because this entire army is brand new,
and I bet there would be a pain in the ass to paint. I mean, like, look at that cathedral tank, man, with all the little intricate details. Like, just the detail on, like, the stained glass in the front right there, the, like, stained glass shield at the front, dude. Like, God, painting that stuff would be such a pain in the ass. Like, I would love to collect a lot of these units and have them and whatnot and display them and obviously use them in games. Just painting them, oh man,
it is brand new price tag. So I personally love them. They might soon become my favorite army. I can't quite tell yet. They look great. They're a little expensive to collect. They have lots of different kinds of abilities, both melee and shooting. No psychic phase, but they do have some shenanigans to stop other people from using.
Right, from what he said in one of the lore videos, they were very extremely mentally fortitude, you know, mentally strong. So they sound kind of pretty anti-psyker. And they can specialize in hunting down and killing, you know, demons.
Both melee and shooting. No psychic phase, but they do have some shenanigans to stop other people from using the psychic phase. They're pretty cool, but they are really hard to play, and they take a lot of practice. So, kind of up to you.
Man,
I would say not
can't
a
stop
very good
yawning.
starting army.
It's one of these days where I'm having trouble waking up. Need to get some more coffee in me. Blah, 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 blah. I apologize if I'm yawning so much and it's getting in the mic.
And they take a lot of practice. So, kind of up to you. I would say not a very good starting army, but they are pretty neat. All right, Grey Knights. I heard you like the psychic.
Yeah, this is the faction. This and the Space Wolves, like I said, are the ones that I think that I would be the most interested in collecting and playing as. So I'm eager to hear about these guys.
Phase. If you like the psychic phase, this is the psychic phase for you. Grey Knights are Space Marines X2. They're super mega duper elite Space Marines that are all psychers. They're nuts. Grey Knights are insane. They are very, very elite. However, you have probably...
They're going to have smaller armies of very powerful units.
Like maybe 40% fewer models than an average army will have. All of your dudes, however, are scary in their own right. They all hit very well on 3s minimum. They all have great armor. Since they're all psychers, they're really good at dealing with other psychers. They also have great shooting and very strong melee. All of your guys have extremely powerful melee weapons. The only downside of Grey Knights is that any anti-psycho shenanigans can really harm them, and you are running an elite army with very few models. When you run very few models, that means every time you're rolling and you roll those ones, it hurts that much more. Grey Knights, though, they have this awesome kind of old school knight round table aesthetic with them all carrying things like halberds and falchions. They've got holy text and they carry books around and flags. But they do get to use every phase as well. Lots of psychic, and then they're shooting and a ton of melee as well. Mainly psychic and melee. In terms of buying them, they're not too bad actually. They're probably one of the cheaper armies as well.
Those look pretty awesome, man. All these models are dope. I want them all. I just want them all. I just want to have fields of models. Shit's sick.
Tabletop, so it's a lot easier to fill out your entire army by only purchasing fewer boxes than normal. As for their scopes, I don't know exactly how new they are. I wouldn't call them very new. I call them like middle ground when it comes to how old they are. They're not super old, but they're not necessarily super new either. That being said, if they are, say, medium old or whatever, they do look great.
Medium old?
Plastic models look, I think they look fantastic, and I would recommend trying them out if you like a Psyker-heavy Space Marine thing. You play Space Marines and you're like, wow, I like the Psychic phase. Grey Knights. No competition. Infantry is for losers. It's big mech boy time. If I'm being honest, though, the Imperial Knights, I wouldn't recommend them. I'm just going to come out and say it. I don't think Imperial Knights are a very good army for a new player.
Not Imperial Knight fan, huh?
One of the cheapest armies you can buy, because while each knight in its own right is very expensive, you
don't have a couple of them
to fill out an entire game's.
Yeah, there's a streamer that I used to watch back in the day who unfortunately passed away, but he bought I remember watching him do some of the stuff or whatever, but he bought a Warlord Titan, so it was like he could only have like this one unit, and it was like the biggest unit you could get. It's insane. Shit was crazy looking.
Worth, and compared that to a full army, they're actually not too bad, like price-wise. The problem with Knights is that, as cool as they are, they want to use the Psyche phase. They have plenty of shooting, though, plenty of shooting, and they can have some really great melee. But when you're playing Imperial Knights, you're not really playing 40k. A great friend of mine said, if you're playing Imperial Knights, you're playing chess, but you have about 6 queens against a normal enemy chess player.
Gotcha.
If the enemy chess player is smart, they could easily beat your 6 queens. I'm sure it'll be pretty simple for them to use their full arsenal to beat you. But if the enemy chess player is a noob, for instance, then there's a good chance that they're not going to be able to win.
So they're kind of like just the noob stomp faction. Someone who doesn't necessarily know what they're doing, they're just going to get rolled. Okay.
And you'll just kind of noob stomp them. And that's what Knights are. Knights are generally noob stompers, or more like just a middle tier army. They're not good for new players because they don't really teach you the game, and it's not the way the game is really, I don't know how to say it, meant to be played, so to speak. I got nothing against Knight players. If you're a Knight player, it's totally fine. If you run a Knight Valiant,
they look so sick, man.
For my respect, all right? Get that Knight Valiant, 2-up armor, 4-up invul, Trader's Pyre. Oh, you can't have both. Just have Trader's Pyre, the coolest weapon in the game. All right, but honestly, just for a new player, I would not recommend Knights. They are cool. They're great painting projects. However, if you would,
I would bet
definitely pick up a Knight.
They would. I would think that because they're so large, they would be the easiest ones to paint, and because they have such surface area. Keep hitting my mic. Sorry. Because they have such a big surface area, I would bet that they. There's a lot of design, work that you could do with them to make them different from, other players' stuff. So
you're not really playing 40k when you play Imperial Knights. You're playing kind of a weird hybrid of it. If anything, get a normal army like, say, Imperial Guard or maybe some Space Marines, and then buy one big Knight and throw it into your army as an ally. That would be the way to do it, I'd say. I think they're better as a supplementary character as opposed to a main army or force. This is also same for Chaos Knights as well. They do look really cool, though. They do look really cool. Golden Boys, Golden Boys. Adeptus Custodians are the elite of the elite. This is probably one of the most elite armies you could possibly play. These guys are nuts. They hit on 2s or higher in shooting and melee. They have
basically don't miss
of a normal Space Marine. They have a better armor save than a normal Space Marine. They all have invulnerable refractor fields around them, which most armies do not have. They're tougher than Marines. They get to re-roll 1s in the shooting and melee phase when a certain captain is near them, which means they're hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s. You absolutely murder people in melee. You've got some okay shooting. Your shooting is hit or miss, but your melee is insane, and you use about 20 models. They are literally the definition of Chad Thundercock.
Of OP.
Okay, Chad Thundercock.
They sound
if that
broken.
was a human being, it would be a custodian. Okay, the problem is that you only have 15. 20,
Right, you only have a handful of them
models in your entire army. It is absolutely crazy how powerful these guys are, but they do pay the price for it. That being said, when it comes to collecting them, they are one of the cheapest armies you can buy. Because they're so elite, you don't need as many things to purchase, you don't need as many models to have.
So I mean, in that regard, they sound like they would be a good starting army for someone who may not necessarily have a ton of money to spend on this stuff. Because you can only have, you know, a handful of units. I wonder, you know, how complicated they are mechanically to play, you know, rules wise, and what things you need to know, and et cetera, and what kind of tactics you can do with them, how complicated they can get.
They're so elite, you don't need as many things to purchase, you don't need as many models to have on the field, so buying custodians is much cheaper than your average army. It's an elite army, and also they're much easier to paint, in my opinion, because they're so big, because they're like 2 feet taller than a Space Marine, lots of a big canvas for your painting, and they're almost all gold. Gold isn't that hard to paint, I wouldn't say. So they're good for painting, they're not very expensive. I would say they're not bad at beginner army, if I'm being honest. They're pretty cool, they have a nice kind of power fantasy to them, but as an elite army, every one you roll, gonna really hurt. So that's something you should be worried about, or warned about at least. They are pretty neat though. I'm not gonna touch on the Assassins, Sisters of Silence, or Inquisition too much because they're not really an actual army. The Assassins
okay, they're just like supplementary units or whatever that you can add to your army, but they don't have like specific armies of their own, I would assume.
Silence or Inquisition too much because they're not really an actual army. The Assassins are really damn cool. There's 4 of them, and you get to pick one to add to your army as you see fit. They all have different things they do and specialize in: a sniper, a horde clear, a kind of confusion specialist, and an anti-psyker character. Cool, their scopes are really nice, and since they're only single characters, not too expensive, but you really can't make an army out of them. They're more of a supplementary character. The Sisters of Silence just recently got an update to allow you to field them with custodians, which is awesome and super cool, and is actually kind of a big part of them because the Sisters of Silence are big anti-psyker, but they only have maybe 2 kits, 3 kits in their entire army, and that's about it. They're not really worth collecting in their own right unless you're already collecting custodians. And the Inquisition are a whole bunch of just little characters, basically. A whole bunch of named characters with cool abilities, which are neat, but not really something that I would try to get a whole bunch of. Look at all 3 of those things after you're already starting collecting.
Gotcha. So they're just like units to supplement into your armies to help help buffer certain weaknesses, essentially. So if like you have an army who's might be weak against psychers, you'd bring in, you know, the anti-psyker assassin or maybe an inquisitor or something like that to deal with some of the stuff. Makes sense.
Try to get a whole bunch of. Look at all 3 of those things after you're already starting collecting another army, and you're like, hey, I kind of want an assassin. Throw an assassin in there. Unless you're playing custodians, then check out the Sisters of Silence, because the custodian's biggest weakness is psychic, and the sisters do a great job at cutting that down. All right, let's move on to Chaos. So we got the Chaos Demons to start off with. Chaos Demons follow one of 4 gods: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh Big Titty. With Slaanesh Big Titty, you're going for melee and fast. You are all melee, you've got no shooting, you got good psychic spells, but you're running in there at Mach 5. Papa Nurgle is slow, but tanky as hell.
They chonk.
Tzeentch, a little bit in between, but tons of psychic spells. Khorne, no psychic, melee, hits like a truck. Pretty much all of the Chaos Demon factions are glass cannons and very heavy into melee. You got some good psychers for about 3 of the 4, because Khorne I don't think has any. So there is still plenty of variety in there, but what you're doing is you got a whole bunch of big glass cannon demons that run up and just break your face.
Murder.
That's Chaos Demons in a nutshell.
Okay.
They all have their various traits. Slaanesh is fast and hits a lot of times. Nurgle is tanky. Tzeentch is psyker. Khorne hits really hard. Pretty simple in that sense. But overall, Chaos Demons, to collect them,
they sound pretty basic.
Not something you would really collect by themselves. You would ally them in with things like Chaos Space Marines, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But as an army in their own right, don't try to make a demon army.
So they're not necessarily their own faction or army that you would field in a game. there are again units that you would supplement in to other armies to help buffer weaknesses. Okay.
Which we're going to be talking about in just a moment. But as an army in their own right, don't try to make a demon
That's
army.
a dope looking model, man. Look at the
Teach you a ton
detail
of
and the
game,
skin
they're a little
and
bit
everything.
limited because you have to stick with
That's
one
so
chaos
sick.
faction.
This is even like a little dude right there. I just noticed that there's a little dude sitting there with him. That's awesome.
Normally, if you want to ally in multiple things, you're probably going to need some Chaos Space Marines to go along with it. And with that, let's talk about that. Chaos Space Marines, you're kind of getting the butt end of Games Workshop. They don't really seem to like you, Chaos, that much. I don't know
Really?
why. A lot of
That's surprising to me because I would think Space Marines would be like the #1 thing they would want to deal with, and then the Chaos Space Marines I would think would be #2 because they're the opposites. They're like really the main antagonists, I would think, right? You know? So that's interesting to me that they're maybe not supported as much.
Games Workshop, they don't really seem to like you, Chaos, that much. I don't know why. A lot of your models aren't very new, and a lot of them are expensive, and your rules aren't that great most of the time, with the exception of something that happened in 7th edition with Chaos Demons, apparently. I heard it was a very, very strong codex. Chaos Space Marines are very similar to regular Space Marines, but they're much more focused on melee combats. You still have shooting, and it depends on which faction you're going through as well. But while you do have your shooting units, it is generally more melee-based, I'd say. Demons in their own right and Chaos in their own right want to run in there and start breaking face. That's generally their MO. As for Chaos Space Marines, it depends on what Legion you're joining, but overall there are a ton of different ways for you to go ahead and get about completing your objective. The Death Guard and the Thousand Suns, I believe, are the most fleshed out. They both have their own codexes. They both have their own special units, especially Death Guard. Death Guard is very recent, and both of them allow you to field a Primarch, which might be one of the coolest.
The Nurgle one, both of them are sick, but the Nurgle one is dope.
The Red, both gigantic, beautiful models that are just awesome showpieces to have. They get shot a lot, but once they get into combat, oh man, do they cause problems. As stated before, you should be building what you'd like, of course. What you enjoy is the most important part of it. But as for Chaos, it's really, you gotta like melee combat, and you gotta like different kinds of allies.
Generally, I do.
I'd say demons aren't, or not demons, but
that's
Chaos
sick looking.
It's a great faction to start off with as a new player, because you need to.
Kind of reminds me of I forget the creature name, but like the what is it, the Arachnotron or something like that from Doom, not the Mother Brain one, but like the littler one with like the plasma rifles. That's pretty dope.
To understand the intricacies of how to do army building and knowing what you're running a little bit more prevalently. And so I'd wait on doing anything Chaos related, at least until they get a solid update, or someone teaches you, or you get a little more into the hobby. With the exception of Death Guard. I think Death Guard is in a good place for a new player, because Death Guard is pretty cool. But besides that, they're a little tough. Okay, let's talk about some Xenos.
The Eldar.
Starting off with the Space Elves, the Eldar. So the Eldar are definitely a more glass cannon-y kind of style group. They are the first Xenos race we're talking.
Yeah, from what he said in some of the previous lore videos, they sound more of like a guerrilla hit and run faction that's good at like psyker stuff.
About, and there are a couple of versions. There's also the Drukhari and the Harlequins. However, the Eldar, they are strike hard, strike fast, and get out of there immediately. So the thing about Eldars, what would happen is they would fly out of somewhere, immediately gun down with extremely high power weaponry, hitting on threes with some kind of BS stratagems, if I'm being honest, and then they can zip back into cover and really annoy you. Honestly, Eldar probably have some of the more powerful shenanigans when it comes to the game. They have lots of weird rules. Their stuff hits extremely hard, but of course, once you fire back at them, if you live, they will crumble under a slight breeze to an extent. If you play Eldar, you won't be making a bunch of friends, if I'm being honest. I'd say Eldar are top 3 most aggravating enemies to fight against. People don't like fighting.
Yeah, any kind of faction that is able to attack and then run away and hide, and like basically you just shoot and then kite and shoot and kite. Any faction that can do that stuff gets annoying. So if that's how they play, I could see that being the case.
Eldar are top 3 most aggravating enemies to fight against. People don't like fighting Eldar a whole lot. myself included. I find them to be quite aggravating. But if you're that kind of person who likes zip in, zip out, and be all kind of trickery and sneaky, they're definitely the army for you. They're definitely more shooting and psychic based. That's the two main things. They've got some good melee, but mainly shooting and psychic based. As for collecting Craft World Eldar, I'd say that they got some good sculpts. Some of their models look pretty good. They got some nice plastic. A few of it's a little bit older, but you don't need a huge army. So when it comes to the money side of it, not too bad. I'd say the financials for it are pretty dang solid.
That's pretty sick looking. It looks like one of the tanks the drone army fields in Star Wars during, you know, the Clone Wars era and whatnot, Phantom Menace and Clone Wars era. I don't know what those tanks are called, but it looks very similar.
And I wouldn't call them an expensive army to collect, at least not from my knowledge. The Dark Eldar, or the Drukhari, are like Eldar cranked up to 12. They're faster, they can hit harder at some points, and they have
They're
really
probably
good melee
super
units.
weak.
The melee units can actually be really scary, but they are also doubly made of paper. They're also a lot harder to play. They're probably top 3 hardest armies to play, along with the Sisters of Battle. And that actually goes on to the Harlequins as well. Harlequins are an army that just don't collect Harlequins, if I'm being honest. They're not a great choice. They have barely any models, and they're really weird, and they have a lot of shenanigans if you want to pull them off. If you're a new player, I would not recommend Harlequins at all. Dark Eldar, Eldar, and Harlequins, speedy, made of paper, hit like absolute trucks, and not too expensive, I wouldn't say. Drukhari, I think, is a little bit more expensive than the other two, but not too pricey because
Those ships look pretty sick, though.
a ton of units in your armies. Moving on, we got Tyranids.
The Tyranids, the Zerg boys.
Bugs. You gotta love those bugs. So many bugs. Now, Tyranids obviously are a horde army. It should be very obvious. They are also a melee horde army. Whoa, I know, call the presses. You are mainly spending your time in the melee phase, as well as some of the psychic phase. You got a lot of good psychers in the Tyranids army, funny enough. You've got some pretty involved and advanced bugs. And your melee phase is as it seems. You have really gigantic, gargantuan creatures that eat everything alive, or you've got 40,000 little boys that eat everything alive. You do actually have some somewhat good...
That looks dope. I don't know what that unit's called, but that looks awesome. Like a giant artillery piece looking thing that also looks like a Hydralisk, you know, hybrid. God, this stuff just, like I said, I wish I had the money to be able to just buy and have all of these units. Just to have them, even if I never played the tabletop game, I would just like to collect this stuff because these things just look sick.
Good shooting too with your Exocrine and your Hive Guard. You can put out some pretty decent shots. They are definitely the kind of army you run if you want big swaths of just these angry little running bug dudes that just swarm on your enemy. It's literally called the Tyranid Swarm. As for price wise though, I'd say they're actually very expensive to collect.
I would say so.
Some are a little bit older, but not all of them.
Like, look at that, man. That's such a sick looking model. This like Cobra looking Hydralisk creature with all those spike appendages. God, it just looks dope.
They're a little bit in between when it comes to the actual date release for their sculpts. I'd say they are a bit older, though they are expensive. They're expensive, and you're running a horde army, so that's definitely one of the top more expensive armies to collect because, come on, tons of bugs, tons of models, and older sculpts. Can be a little bit of a challenge. Gene Stealer Cults. You want to play bugs, but you want to play human bugs with scrotum heads.
Human bugs with scrotum heads, okay.
Very new. And they run in this almost as weird as AdMech style army. They're very fast, they hit really hard, and they like dip underground, they crawl from underground, they hit you with very powerful short-range weaponry and super strong melee attack, and then they kind of run away and they like zip, hit and run tactics. That's probably the best way to do it. Hit and run tactics, they come out of the ground, they spook you, they do a bunch of damage, they run away, they got some weird psychic.
They sound annoying to play against them.
These, like, makeshift Mad Max trucks and stuff. They definitely have a unique play style. They deploy strangely, they like to zip around the place kind of strangely.
The model right there almost looks like a bald Klingon female. The ridges or whatever.
And they definitely are one of the more unique armies there are. Would I recommend collecting them? No. They kind of fulfill a niche, but they're not that like overarchingly special, I'd say. I don't know what the word is exactly, but they are a very specific play style for a very specific player. If you're running Tyranids, you might consider doing Gene Stealer cults, but at that point, you already kind of know what you're doing, so I don't think.
I mean, I feel like the idea of the Gene Stealers, they're supposed to infiltrate, you know, a world and, you know, convert the world. They're not really supposed to be like a standing army, right? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but from the lore and stuff, whatever that I've heard of and has been talked about, they seem more of like an infiltrator kind of thing to see dissent before maybe, you know, the main Tyranid armies come in.
I think I recommend this to a new player. Gene Stealer cults and Tyranids both a little bit rough to recommend to a new person because they are very expensive, both of them. And while the models for Gene Stealer cults are definitely a lot newer and that's much nicer, they need practice. They are definitely a harder army, and I would recommend waiting on those if you're a new player. Orcs.
The Orc
Orcs.
boys.
Now, orcs. I would say orcs are great if you like the Horde army and you like having RNG dictate your life. So,
Yeah, and that's the problem that I have, and I've talked about this before in one of the other videos, is like the thing about the orcs though, like RNG frustrates me. But the thing about the orcs though is you go in knowing that that's the case and you're going in to have fun. I wouldn't think they would be a very good tournament faction because they're more RNG focused, but I could definitely see them just being fun to play because it's one of those things. It's a steamroll faction from what it sounds like, where if you keep rolling well, you're just gonna destroy everything, and if you keep rolling bad, like you're just gonna get stomped. But that feeling of just rolling over, you know, an army, I could see being just like just super satisfying.
orcs are great if you like the Horde army and you like having RNG dictate your life. So orcs hit on 5s, as I mentioned in my last video. However, if you roll a 6, you get to make another attack with the weapon. Everything from the little pistol to the giant rocket launcher. You can have a rocket launcher that fires 3 times, and if you get lucky enough, you can have it fire 5 times. But the main thing that you're probably going to be jumping with orcs for is the giant green tide, because their melee ability is pretty humongous. They have very weird gunfire. They got their weird weapons and their strength.
Like that big ass model right there in the center of the screen that looks so sick with like the chain gun with the multi chain gun barrels. Like all these units everything just looks so dope, man.
Rules, the DACA rules to allow them to get all these extra shots, and they can even have some pretty dang good shooting with things like shock attack guns and DACA jets and stuff. If orcs hit on 5s and shooting, they hit on like 3s in melee. Orcs love to beat the hell out of each other. So it's very obvious that once they get into melee, they'll just start pounding on you because they are really good at hitting stuff. In fact, I might be speaking a little bit too hyperbolically when I say RNG controls your life with orcs. Or RNG controls your shooting, but your melee is actually pretty dang good. They've got a special ability called Here We Go, which allows them to re-roll their charge dice, which is a very rare thing and extremely powerful buff. Getting into melee has never been easier if you're an orc. As for collecting orcs, expensive. Probably the most expensive.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a horde army, I would assume it's expensive because you got to field a lot of units, so.
Been easier if you're an orc.
Makes sense.
As for collecting orcs, expensive. Probably the most expensive horde army there is. Probably more expensive than Tyranids or Guard or anything in between. They have sculpts that are sometimes new, sometimes very old. You can have cool new models like Gazgul Thraka, but then you got a whole bunch of really damn old orc models because orcs have been around forever. Their codex in their own right is pretty neat, and there's some pretty good models in there, but orcs just, they're showing their age, and you need a shitload of them. And they are very expensive for that reason. So they're expensive to collect, and you need a ton to collect a good-sized army. But playing them, if you like melee with some really fun shenanigans and a bit of RNG, I can see why someone would like orcs, because they're orcs. Come on, they're great. Yeah. Let's talk Necrons. So the Necrons,
this would be another faction that I'd be interested in.
I'd play Necrons, honestly. Necrons, I mean, they're just so cool. Undead, Egyptian, skeleton robots that carry enslaved gods into battle. How is that the coolest thing ever? So
with like weapons that destroy you on an atomic level, like They just sound and look sick.
That carry enslaved gods into battle. How is that the coolest thing ever? So Necrons are fittingly named all about necromancy, but not like the undead homina necromancy, but like necromancy through metal. So the way Necrons are is that they are kind of a slow moving, at least some of their units slow moving, gun line with some mixed in melee units. Not all their army is melee, but their melee units that they have are actually like really scary. But for a while, Necrons are kind of slow-moving Terminator style guys. They just blast you away at a distance with some very powerful weaponry. They kind of have Space Marine stat lines, actually. They run about as many models as Space Marines. They got similar stat lines and similar weaponry. I'd say that they are actually quite similar to Space Marines in the terms of how they play. But they actually do have a lot of weird shenanigans that make Necrons their own. For instance, the main thing that you might want to pick Necrons for is their reanimation protocols. Special ability that, let's say you got 10 units of your base Necron unit, warriors, for instance. You got 10 Necron warriors, your basic troop choice. Your opponent kills like, let's say 7. Kills 7 of them, you got 3 of them left. Their turn ends, your turn starts. You then roll a dice for every dead model. So 7 models, 7 dice.
7 dice.
And for every 5 or higher, you automatically get one of your models to just stand right back up. Your Necron just goes like...
Really?
Your vehicles regenerate health as time...
So again, like, if you're rolling well, you can be extremely hard to kill because your dudes just reanimate. Man, okay. I mean, yeah, that could be a lot of fun. I could see that being annoying to play against, but that could also be very fun to play as.
Your Necron just goes like... Your vehicles regenerate health as time goes on. You have special abilities to maybe make your Necrons come back on a 4-up instead of a 5. You can re-roll your 1s for it. It's all about getting your units to come back up and being like, if you're fighting Necrons, you better kill it. Because if you leave it wounded, it's going to repair itself, and that's not a very good thing. That's the idea of Necrons. They got good shooting, they got good melee, and honestly...
Yeah, I mean, they sound like a faction I'd be interested in playing for sure.
Necron player. They are getting a massive update right now. This is right before 9th when this video is coming out, and they are getting huge new models.
Yeah, man, I mean, just... Yeah, look at this, the model, right? All these models just look sick. I think this is supposed to be like one of the gods that are enslaved, some kind of like War of the Worlds, like Walker looking thing. Like all these, like the models for all this stuff just look so dope. Like I could easily spend a fortune just collecting all of these things, whether I play the game and use them or not, just to have them. Just, yeah. This
is right before 9th when this video is coming out, and they are getting huge new model ranges, a ton of just new units in general, massive updates, rule updates. Necrons are getting big additions, and I think it's going to be super great. Now is a good time to be a Necron player. The new stuff might be a little expensive to collect because it is new stuff. That being said, they're not an elite army, but I guess they can be played an elite army if they wanted to, but they don't have a few models, they don't have too many models, they're nice in between, and now is a damn good time for it. Last but not least, we have the Tau Empire. The Tau Empire...
Which I guess most people hate because they're just all pew-pews and they can be a pain in the ass to play against because they're all just pew-pews.
Good time for it. Last but not least, we have the Tau Empire. The Tau Empire is for people who want to gun their opponent down with the most sci-fi hardcore Gundam giant mech stuff you can think of. You want to
I mean, who doesn't like Gundam mech stuff, man? I mean, like, a lot of that stuff looks pretty cool.
Have your entire enemy obliterated off the board through just the unrelenting volley of railgun shots.
So I guess just thinking now here, a question that I would have, do any factions have any kind of like super weapons, like any kind of like nuke ability or whatever that can like clear board, not necessarily clear boards or whatever, but I mean like do super amounts of damage? You know, are there any factions or any units that have things like that? Let me know.
Off the board through just the unrelenting volley of railgun shots and rail rifles and fusion blasters. You will look up and you will see missiles, giant homing missiles blot out the sky as it rains down on your army because the Tau player's got 40,000 missile pods on all of his characters. He's got flying drones to fire laser sights to mark them, to have better accuracy, to block shots, and you know, your big battle suit will be rolling up and then a drone will come in and block a missile from it. The Tau are definitely more of an Eastern inspired, definitely a Gundam kind of look to them. And they are just ludicrously powerful in shooting phase. And they also have tons of special abilities to stop your opponent from getting to you in the charge phase. The Tau has no melee. Their melee is straight garbage. When a Tau infantry start punching, it means they've lost. And you might think to yourself, wow, Berkey, this sounds great and aggravating. Yep, that's about right. The Tau get a lot of shit. Some of it warranted, some of it not so warranted. The models in their own right definitely don't fit very well with 40K. They're much more of a sci-fi Gundam style.
Yeah. They do, yeah. They don't really feel 40K-ish. They just feel like a generic kind of sci-fi, futuristic, you know, faction.
Own right definitely don't fit very well with 40K. They're much more of a sci-fi Gundam style thing compared to a gothic grimdark sci-fi fantasy. However, I do think they do look pretty cool in their own right. It's just kind of weird in this universe. But when you've got an entire army whose whole job is to blast you away from incredible ranges across the map, and every time you even try to retaliate, they either gun you down when you try to charge or they block your shots with drones, it can be pretty aggravating. That being said, there are really cool new ways to play Tau, like close range attacks with Cold Star battle suits in the Farside Enclaves, which, by the way, if you ever use a Cold Star battle suit, or a Cold Star commander, I suppose, or a Yavara, you have my respect. So you do have different options when it comes to Tau instead of just sit back and fire, but you definitely don't got much melee.
Okay.
You definitely don't got much melee.
So, I mean, yeah, I guess... Yeah, I could just see that being like really annoying to play against, especially like if you're a chaos army. Like I would assume the chaos armies would be really bad against Tau because they're like super melee focused, and Tau will just sit back and pew pew and pick you off before you can do anything about it. So, I mean, yeah, I could see that being extremely annoying and not fun to play against, but on the flip side, fun to play as. You know,
melee, you suck at melee. But if you just want to gun people down and the only phase you care about is the shooting phase, you don't care about psyche, you don't care about melee, you just want to blast people, Tau is definitely for you. As it comes for collecting them, their scopes are pretty good. They're not entirely super new, but they do look great. They have a whole bunch of different kinds of mechs, big and small. They got drones, big and small. They got infantry units and everything. They do look solid, high-tech, and their scopes do look nice. They're also, I'd say, not too expensive. You don't need a ton of them, and the battle suits themselves are expensive for each box, but you only need so many of them because they are very expensive when it comes to the points cost in the game. So Tau are on the middle level of the...
That need confirms pretty much what I've thought, you know, from, like I said, the Warhammer Total War. Each unit has a point value, and so that represents how many units you can have on the field. Okay.
Are very expensive when it comes to the points cost in the game. So Tau are on the middle level of the expensive tier. Whew, that was a lot of talking right there. That covers it though. That is every army in 40K for you trying to figure out which army you want to play. I will reiterate, Space Marines, they are the best. I know it kind of sucks for some of us, but trust me, they are the best. I would highly recommend if you're trying to get into it, get a box of Intercessors, check out the rules, paint them up maybe. 9th edition is coming very, very soon. It looks extremely promising, and I think now is probably the best time to be jumping into this hobby. I want more people to be a part of this community, to be a part of this fandom. I think it is exciting. I think it has a little something for everyone, and I don't want anyone at all to not feel welcomed, not on any basis, not on basis of age, sex, gender, race. I don't give a shit, okay? I don't care who
you don't even give a care.
I want you to at least give it a shot and be a part of this group with me because I would always love new people. And honestly, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a good time along with the rest of us. So, yeah. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody.
Thank you for making it.
Pleasure having you here. Check out this plate in the description, please. They are the wonderful sponsor for today's video, and they were actually quite wonderful to work with as well. And plus, with so much Warhammer stuff, I'm sure you can find something that you can definitely decorate your wall
Big
with.
Pappy
For a
Nerds.
decent price as well. As for me, my name's been Bricky. I have a Patreon if you'd like to support me. As you can see, all the names flying up on the screen right now. These are all the people on the $10.
Go check them out on all the stuff.
Who decided to help support me on my videos. You are all absolutely wonderful. And I want to give a special shout out to my top 3 patrons currently, which are Big Papa Nerds, which is so fitting for today, Drunken Legends, the absolute crazy Texas man, and of course, Krieg the Psycho, which is a wonderful Borderlands reference. 3 of you, you are on the top tier for Patreon, and I really do appreciate it. I wouldn't be able to make this many videos without you guys, and it is wonderful having you here. And I see you on the Twitch stream all the time, so I know you guys, I know you around. It's good. I'll see you soon. Besides that, if you want to check out my Twitch stream, I stream multiple times a week. It is in the description. I would love to have you there. We can talk a little bit Warhammer or anything in between, just play some games. And finally, if you're interested in copying some merchandise like the one I'm wearing, or maybe just get a little bit of bee stickers up in your world, check that out too. All right, I don't know what video I'm gonna be making next. It might be a League one, but I might hop onto more 9th edition stuff when 9th edition comes out. Perhaps I'll even make a video on how to play it. But until then, thank you so much for watching. My name's been Bricky, and the Emperor protects. Bye-bye.
All right, and there you go. There you go. That was Bricky on his what is the best Warhammer 40k faction army to start with. You know, go check him out. I'll have a link to this video by itself below down in the description. So if you want to watch his video individually without me and my commentary on it, that'll be there, and I'll have a link to his channel as well. So you can go check him out on all the things. He's got a Twitch channel, Patreon, YouTube channel. I'm sure, you know, he's all over the social medias. So go check him out. Good video. It didn't really change. It pretty much reaffirmed the idea of probably going with either the Space Wolves or the Grey Knights to start with. You know, from what he's saying, the Space Marines would be the best factions, you know, to start with. They're the simplest ones. They're the, you know, easiest ones to paint. And it sounds like the Grey Knights, honestly, would probably be a good one to start with. Money wise, because they're a little bit more of an elite army, so you don't necessarily have to have as many units, you know, on the field to play as. So pretty interesting. I would like to know a video going over some more of the actual rules of the game and how the actual game is played. So I might look around and see if Bricky's got a video on that to actually talk about the specific rules. If he doesn't, let me know if anyone out there that you guys know of has made, you know, any kind of video going over like how the actual game is played, some of the rules and whatnot. Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate you guys watching. If you're watching here to the very end, it means a lot. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the reaction to this video. Like I said, I've ordered my first Warhammer 40k book. Go ahead and diving right in headfirst in the Horus Heresy, so I'm gonna start doing some videos and getting some content out, you know, for that. Like I said, I'll let you guys know when we're gonna do a Dark Tide community night. And yeah, so do you have any recommendations for any other content creators that their stuff you want me to check out? I've been compiling a list of stuff to go through, so we're gonna start going through some of those soon, checking out some of that stuff. And like I said, I want to start creating my own lore videos for 40k and various other games and universes and things that I'm into, so we'll see some of those coming in the future, hopefully. But thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it, the love and support lately. The channel's been growing a lot. Thank you very, very much. Hope you're having a wonderful day whenever you're watching this, and I will see you guys on the next one. Have a wonderful day.